visual design, because I come from a visual design background and development background. I'm not a medical person in my background. However, there are certain things that you can do to make any visual piece of medium stand out, which your poster will be. There's obviously difficulties that Anorak's gone and talked about with the move to online. So there's a few things we can do to mitigate that. So first thing that often a lot of people forget, everything I'm going to talk about are very simple rules that if you just follow them, your poster will just look better just by following these really simple rules. Some of them Anurag has already said, but I feel like it's important to reinforce them. So first things first, simply just having alignment of everything, having everything that is in the center be a center, whether you're left justified, center justified, right justified, it doesn't matter what you're doing it. Make sure things are aligned, and the small things matter. So things like spaces between words, spaces between texts, having them equal. You should be able to see I have that poster design, the word height of that, I double it again, and it really does sometimes come down to be this precise, which makes everything just look better. Centering things in the center of the screen, making sure there's equal space on both sides, and above and to the side as well. So the justification for this is the alignment helps people to relate things to each other. So if we look at this example here, where we have the left and top aligned edge word, the text on the left to the bottom, even though usually we as Western readers would read from left to right, because the alignment of the text on below is also left aligned, similarly to the edge, what happens is our eye is drawn to that. So it seems like it's a subsection of the edge word. So this can help you if you have a lot of text in your poster. Ideally you shouldn't, but sometimes you can't get away with it. What it allows you to do is have this kind of ruler that draws the eye down towards that text, so where you want it to look at. Similarly, Anorak said a little bit about composition. So there's multiple different types of composition. Now, I think for academic poster, we should keep it simple. So there's only two that you should really try to be using unless you really know what you're doing. So the first is the rule of thirds, and a lot of posters are set out in the rule of thirds. And that's just simply chopping everything up. So whether it's landscape or portrait into thirds and trying to align your text columns and graph columns within those thirds. If you're a little fancier, you may be able to use the Fibonacci sequence. So this is like the golden ratio, 1.14. So what you might see in this is if you have quite a lot of text, you may want to put it in one of the boxes in the top right. You may want to put references in the bottom right square. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Hopefully you can. And then you may want to have the main text body on the left-hand side. Now, this is asymmetrical, so it's a little more difficult to work with. But if you want to make something eye-striking and stand out from the rest, you may want to do something like this. So I just have a small example here. This is quite a nicely laid out poster. It's got good color usage as well. It doesn't have too much stuff going on in it. There's a nice sprinkling of where things are. And if we overlay the rule of thirds on it, we can see that it is set out into thirds. Now, you don't have to follow it exactly. So sometimes when I say this, people start putting columns exactly into the thirds. No, as long as things more or less align, they will have a visual impact and it will look better. So the design trends change from time to time, and people do get influenced by them. So if your poster follows current design trends, often it has this subconscious suggestion that your research is cutting edge. It's a silly thing and it sounds really silly, but it really does have an impact. So keeping things symmetrical and really simple, this is kind of the modern way of doing things. It is something that came about because of a concept called material design. So this is actually a really useful page, material.io. This is from Google, and they have a bunch of different like tools and suggestions for things you can do of how to make things look very visible and clear. And it came out of a need to make small text and small graphics very clear on mobile screens and tablets. And guess what? It's something that's really relevant to us, especially these days, and especially with academic posters, because often we have a lot of text and we have a lot of information that needs to be clear and legible. and in quite a limited amount of space. A0 seems like a lot, but it really isn't. So the main concepts are you use flat colors. So you try not to use gradients, shading. You can have very minimal use of that, but you try to be as simple as possible. We use very bold lines, so the lines are simple and they're simple geometry. So you don't have like very complex kind of visuals unless you need it. So if you need to have an image of like a brain track section, like there's no getting around it. It's going to be complex. That's fine. But I suppose if you're creating a graph or a pie chart, try to keep it as simple as possible. Use as few lines and as few effects as possible so that the data gets across. Use space. So this is, again, something that's really forgotten. Again, you have a very limited space, but if you try to make consistent space between words, so if I have a column of text and another column of text, and I consistently have a space between the two columns that's double or triple the width of the paragraphs in my text, automatically a viewer will then separate those two pieces of text. An example that you may see from modern design, Apple started using this very well, is a concept called content chunking. So you may want to use this as well. So not only to use negative space to separate areas of different interests, you may also want to create a bounding box around things that like belong together. So if you have a methodology section, you may want to create a bounding box around there, as well as use negative space. It's up to you. But the what that allows is, if you look at this image, people will kind of be drawn to, there's a horizontal line, if you can see that in the bottom, in the middle, sorry. So this horizontal line separates the two because that's a one contiguous line. And then within that section, there's everything related in that section, and my eye will move around between those. But each of those are chunked individually, so I can pay attention to each section as they go. This may not work for all academic posters, but if your poster has different little pieces of research that you want that are contiguous and separate, you may want to use a concept like this. So Anurag talked a little bit about this as well. Readability is extremely important. Readability is different from legibility. Legibility is just how clear your message gets across, and that's, of course, really important. But readability is specifically your use of typography, fonts, spacing between words. So as Anurag was saying, there is sans serif and serif. What I was taught, and this could be wrong, but I was taught that serif is used for print and small print, so books, kind of journals, those kind of things, where it's a physical piece of paper and the letters are small, and serif works well for that. Whereas sans works a lot better large, and also if on screens. And there's a lot of technical reasons why that is, to do with pixel and screen door effects. We don't need to go into that. Just in general, it's kind of accepted that sans serif is better for screens. Again, with the way that most things are online, you may wish to change everything to sans serif for now, because there are quite a bit of research that suggests it's better to read on screen. And then we have legibility, which is essentially the choice of typeface, the choice of your spacing. You may be drawn to certain things, like the really fancy legibility word there. Your eye may be drawn to that straight away, and so that may be perfect for something like I guess a title or the name of university, something like that, if you want it to really stand out. However, actual text should probably be quite simple and easy to read. And just really don't forget about the wording that you use. Personally, I prefer third person. I'm sure you all know about that, but it sometimes can be taken away if people forget how to get their language across. So try to be as neutral as possible. Try not to brag, and that's something that can be sometimes difficult when it comes across. Like it sometimes can come across as you're like showing off. So I guess just try to be matter of fact and clear. So the next section is about contrast. Again, Anurag spoke about contrast, and there's very, very many different variations of contrast. So you have what's called value contrast. So that is, if I take an image or your poster and I just convert it to black and white, put a black and white filter over it, value is from black to gray to white, that kind of strip. how contrasted are your items within the poster. So that is value contrast. So I have that on the left. What I have on this poster, it looks like black, but it's not. It's actually slightly off black. It's a little bit less. And what that allows is for less eye fatigue. And again, because we're viewing on screens emit light. So it's a really small, simple thing. It's maybe a bit nitpicky, but it does help for legibility. And then it's also contrast in terms of color, which I'll talk about in a sec, but also your density of words and items. So you may want to, if you're finding a lot of text is showing up, you may want to break it up with a graph, and vice versa. So you also have contrast in the amount of items and the types of items that you have on the poster. This is a really helpful tool. Material.io has this as well. This is a, you don't need to worry about all of this. This goes way too deep. But the concept that I wanted to get across is the color wheel. And the color wheel, you can just Google color wheel and you'll find one online. And what the color wheel allows you to do is really easily choose a color palette for your poster that works and it looks good. So there's many different rules of the colors that you can choose. But I think the ones that probably work best for academic posters, because we're not trying to be striking, we're not trying to be in your face, we're trying to be to catch people's eye, but also the data is what's important, and that needs to come true forwards. So analogous, which is colors that if you have a color wheel and you pick one color, the colors that are beside that main color. And I would also suggest you choose 3 or 4 colors. So you have a primary color, which most of your poster, maybe your background is that primary color. You have a secondary color, that's maybe your titles, maybe the chunking boxes that you have. And then you have an accent color, and that's maybe your graphs or bullet points. You may use that color. So that accent color is the last little bit that stands out. So having that color scheme helps you a lot. You can build a color palette from that. Again, that material.io website, if you go there, there's a color palette creator. You just put in the colors you want, and it'll give you this kind of shades. And what you can do is use those for your graphs, for your data, for your bullet points, whatever. And because they all are coming from a specifically created color scheme, they usually will look like they work well together, especially if you use analogous. So this is really important and something that is sometimes forgotten about. So I completely agree with what Anurag said. Don't put a graph in if you don't need one. But graphs do look good. They do draw people's attention. So wherever you can, try to make that graph really pop. Try not to put, the opposite example I'll give is Anurag was saying about if you have X amount of men and Y amount of women, that can just be a text. On the flip side, don't have like 7 data points and put that all in a huge list of text. Put it in a graph. It's a lot easier to read. So the rule, the guideline that usually is given is around 60% graphics to 40% text. And that's by surface area. So if I have the poster, around 60% of that should be your graphics, including your chunking or your borders and your background, and around 40% text. It's not a hard and fast rule, it's just a guideline. And within your text, like same, it's all simple stuff, but really go over your text with a fine-tooth comb. Anything where your words, the sentence that you use can be cut down but have the same meaning, it probably is best to cut it down. It probably is best to convert a lot of data points to bullet points if you can. Try not to pack your text too close together. Try to make it legible. So everything I've said now, I've written there on the right hand side, and I've used, even though the color is correct, they don't really stand out against each other, and it's just awful. You can't read it. It's unclear. You don't really know what's going on. The left, even though there's actually technically less information in that, people will remember that much more than the right, even though there's so much more stuff going on. There's a few things that I would suggest you not do, especially because we're online as well. There's a few concepts that you shouldn't use. So like if you have these kind of like little shines and bevels and embosses and effects, ideally you shouldn't use those. They kind of distract too much. Stuff like reflections and glare, again, same thing. Multiple different fonts all over the place, and cursive. It's very difficult to read online. So ideally you shouldn't have something like that. These posters are not what I would call bad, but they're designed for someone to read at leisure, which is not what you're doing in an academic poster. There's going to be tons of posters that they're going to be looking at. So you want people to be able to get the information from yours quite easily. I'm going to show you an example of a poster that I think has a lot of issues. If you want to yell them out in chat, go ahead. But there's quite a few things that are wrong here. So first of all, in terms of alignment, it's all over the shop. So if I look at the left here, this is a center aligned, but it's to the left. And that spacing that's on the left-hand side doesn't go through the entire text. It's just like, it's different spacing because it's center aligned. And similarly, even if we go down the left column, this picture, the space on the left and the top is different. It's not a huge deal. Obviously, your data is the most important thing, but it really does affect the perception of the data. It shows an attention to detail, a lack of attention to detail. You have graphs that straddle the two different columns, and I guess that they're supposed to show an interaction between the two. I don't know. I'm not a biochemist, but there ideally should be a chunking box around them or like an arrow to show that they are interacting with each other, whereas now it just looks like a mistake almost. We also have, Jesus, if I count this, the amount of font sizes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got 6, we got 7 because that's a bold font, and then we got 8, and like there's like 10 different font sizes in the top. Ideally, you should pick on your poster. I'm going to have your title, so that's going to be huge always. Your references and your author names, maybe like 2 more different sizes, and then in your main body text, you should ideally, if possible, only have 2 or 3 different sizes for like main headings, main text, and maybe subheadings, and that's it. Keep it as simple as possible. Whereas here, I have all sorts of stuff going all over the place. This is a different font size to this area here. Even the captions underneath the images are all different font sizes. Nothing is aligned. I don't really know what relates to each other. They do have the 3 main columns, so that does help to separate each other, but there's not a lot of space between them, so it can get very cluttered and very confusing. We have here something that looks like it's good, but there's a little bit of an issue here, which is the value contrast, which I was talking about. So if I converted this to black and white, the color of the background and the text is too similar. So it makes it really hard to read because they don't stand out on each other, and it's a fine line to walk. This one is a little too difficult to read. There's a lot of like pretty kind of like background texture, which isn't necessary at all. It kind of just takes away from the poster. And we have this, they're technically nice kind of like lines across the top and the bottom, but they don't need to have those little extra little bits. They don't add anything. Now, if the extra little gradations pointed to like maybe the introduction and then pointed to results and then pointed to the final text, the conclusion, that would make a bit of sense. But as it is, it's just there for show, and it doesn't really do much except detract. In fact, your attention is drawn to that. And then there's stuff like a little map of the world where the authors are from. It's kind of nice, but again, really not necessary. You've got limited space, and their references are tiny as a result. So, use your space wisely. This is I would say, a good one. There is 4 colors that are chosen. There are 4 colors. 3 analogic, so blue, green are close to each other on the color wheel. And then the red and kind of like the peach kind of red is on the opposite side, so it contrasts. So overall, it works together, and because they're pastel, they don't jar as much as well. So pastel is kind of like the in thing to do. And again, if you see like a really nice little thing where the title color are separate from each other, and then the major points within the title colors are also in the title color. So I know straight away they're related to it. There's even a line that kind of like brings my eye down to that chunk of text, and also the major bullet points allow me to know that, okay, these are the major things that I want to be paying attention to. It's really nice. And ideally as well, I think it is done here where that consistency is carried across, where anything related to do with blue, the alcohol expensivity questionnaire, is also in the graph, that even though it's further on, it still maintains that contiguous color scheme. So it's clear. Subconsciously, I understand that it's talking about the same thing. Here's an example of one of them is my poster, and if I was going to do this again, I would change quite a few things about it. I did this, like there's a few little issues with like alignment and spacing here, and there's a tiny bit of inconsistency. There's probably a bit too many font sizes that I would like. I would probably redo this again, but overall, hopefully you would agree that it is clear to see that there's an introduction chunk section and a method and a conclusion. You can go through them. The reason why I wanted to show this is not to show off or anything, but just like you can use images that you haven't made if they're relevant and if you reference them, and if they look good, put them in. And the other little trick I like to use is to put in pictures of people if it's relevant, because as humans we're kind of drawn to faces and people. So if there's a way to put it in where it's just not random, if it actually is relevant to your work, I do find it tends to draw attention. People start to look at it and they're curious, and that's like, just a little trick to get people in. So overall, just good design is as little design as possible. This is a concept by Dieter Rams, who's a designer, and it brings forward to your academic posters. Your work is your work, and that's what you want to get across. You don't want to clutter it and make it too difficult to be read. And I'll echo what Anurag said. Your work, you're an expert in your work, so don't feel pressured, don't feel afraid. You know what you're talking about. This is the research you're doing. Be nice and be friendly. Those things all go a lot longer, go a really long way, much more than you would expect. That's my Twitter handle and my Insta handle. If anyone has any questions or layouts, like if I have time, you can even ping me your academic poster, and I'm super happy to go over it and maybe make some pointers or suggestions. I'm completely fine with that. Are there any questions before I go back to Anurag? I don't even know where the chat's gone.